my question is leadership. Ellen Grace from Democratic Harvard might follow that up on doing civil disobedience. And I like this one on the contradiction of legacy. And Dave had a very simple question. Should this course, what you used to about having a course like this, but then Katie has now modified the course. Yeah, let's do her. She's made it a little bit less flattering, of course. Is that okay? If there are others, I couldn't even find one of the ones that you mentioned, but maybe this one. Thank you. And thanks for your comments on the opening. Sorry. We'll fix it. Just the first part. Would you prefer a handheld or a clip-on microphone?
What are you going to use?
I think I'll use the handheld. We have two of them. Welcome. We'll get started. It's difficult to measure an individual's influence in conserving or transforming a society. This course has had many influential guests, from a Finnish Prime Minister in 2000 to former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich last week, but never have we interviewed someone with as influential a career as President Lawrence Summers. At the World Bank, at the Treasury Department, and now at Harvard, Professor Summers has had the power to reshape the lives of millions of people, from Moscow to Seoul to Cambridge, in accordance with his own vision of the good. Many of us here aspire to influence, and we hope to learn from your example. But it is not likely that many or any of us in this room within our lifetimes will match the sheer magnitude of Larry Summers' global influence. People at the top of the world, so to speak, tend to be very careful about engaging in public deliberation, preferring instead the control provided by press secretaries and photo ops. And I think that Lawrence Summers shows real courage in coming here to submit to your questions, and I stand in gratitude for that. Please join me in welcoming President Larry Summers.
That was quite an introduction. I noticed you kept using the word influence rather than the word accomplishments. And then, in case I missed the point, I noticed that you applauded my courage in being willing to submit myself to people's questions. I'm delighted to discuss anything that's on anybody's mind.
Thank you. I had in mind a long list of accomplishments, but I knew that it would be a mortal sin for me to resort to flattery. So we will take the first question from Danielle Thiriot. Where is Danielle? Yep.
Thank you for coming, President Summers. You have achieved unprecedented professional success in your life, as Brian just outlined, and this commitment has inevitably required sacrifices. What personal sacrifices have you had to make in order to get where you are today, and do you have any regrets? If you could go back and do it over again, would you do anything differently, and do you have any advice for us as we embark on our professional careers?
You know, there's a tendency when you look at people's careers, or when you read biographies of people, or you think about careers, to assume that there was a plan and a strategy all along the way, and then you had a successful plan and a successful strategy, and maybe good things happened. I can't say that may be a good approach. I can't say that it was my approach. I've tried to do things that I love doing, and I've tried to do things that I love doing as well as I can, and I've tried to have the things that I do be of significance that went beyond my own comfort and my own self, and I've relied on the fact that if I do that, good things will tend to happen to me through my career, and I'll get presented with attractive opportunities. And I've been very fortunate in that it's worked out that way. I don't kid myself for a moment that if I have been successful, it isn't very substantially a reflection of good fortune and the things I happen to know about being things that the world wanted to know about at particular points in time, happening to be in the right places when various kinds of selections are made. And it seems to me that it's terribly, terribly important in life to try to take what you do seriously, but not to take yourself too seriously, and in particular, not to develop a sense of entitlement around having a position of influence. And I've tried always to be, not always successfully, but I've tried always to do that. And I think that's why my approach here is very much to believe that it's part of my job to be able to ask anybody anything that I want to ask, and to not feel that Harvard's traditions are beyond challenge if they're not working for students today, but at the same time to feel that, yes, I've got an obligation to make decisions in a number of areas, but that I should be entirely free to meet with as many groups as I can and to have students be prepared to tell me that I'm all wrong if that's what they think, and for people to be prepared to ask me to justify any conclusions or judgments that I've come to. Do I have regrets? Look, anybody in a position like the one I have now or the one I had before is in a position of making lots of decisions. And frankly, if you make 80% of them right, you're doing very, very well. And so there are many decisions that ex post I wish we'd made differently. In most cases, you're making a judgment in a situation which you can't know all about, and you make the best judgment you can. But, if you have to bet on whether a die is going to come up 1, 2, 3, or 4, or whether it's going to come up 5 or 6, it's pretty clear what the right way to bet is. You should bet on 1, 2, 3, or 4, but you're going to have made the wrong bet a third of the time. And so I hope that a lot of my mistakes fall in that category. But there are things, and when we do something or I make a decision that turns out wrong, I try to ask myself whether there was a way we could have thought about it better and avoided that. And that's part of learning from your mistakes. Speaking more personally, in the fullness of it all, I'm thrilled with how my life, really very happy with how my life has worked out. But, I'm not going to tell you, and you'll all find this as you get older, there are trade-offs in life. You cannot be negotiating through the night to prevent Mexico from going bankrupt and tucking your kids into bed that night. And you can't be in a position to negotiate and to have that kind of responsibility if you haven't been at the office long hours, a fair amount in your life. And, have I gotten that balance right at every point in my life? There are choices I've made along those dimensions that if I had it to do over again, I probably would have made differently. But I try to be mindful of that and to keep that kind of balance in life as well.
Sandra Kim.
Thanks for coming, Dr. Summers. We really appreciate that you are here. My question is, as a father of 3, what sorts of fatherly characteristics transfer over to your line of work, and especially now in your vision as president of Harvard?
Well, not sure I know quite how to answer that. I hope that my 3 kids are going to grow up to, my twin daughters are 13, my son is 10, and I hope that they're going to grow up to be fulfilled, happy people, happy above all in their relationships with each other, their relationships with their parents, and their relationships with the families they form, and their relationships with their friends, and that they're going to be people who are going to find a passion for themselves and are going to pursue that passion in a way that makes them part of something larger than themselves and in a way that contributes to our broader society. That's what I hope and dream of for them. And in many ways, that's what I hope will be the experience of students at Harvard. You know, as president of the university, it is my task, I think, in many ways the faculty's task, to focus more on your academic and professional development relative to your personal development than I do in my role as a parent. But I hope that during the time that students are here, they'll form friendships that last a long time, that they will learn a lot of ideas, but also develop a sense of ideals and a commitment to using the gifts that got them to be here, to make a contribution to our larger society. I hope that we as a university community will be a community that is a model of openness and tolerance, in which on the one hand we are very much committed to the idea that it is the power of ideas that matters rather than the idea of power, and in which every proposition can be debated vigorously, and that from that process we can hope to get closer to some concept of truth. We'll never find ultimate truth, but I hope our discussions and our dialogue and our debate are more than about understanding each other's perspective, but they're also about getting to some closer approximation of truth and having that truth make the world a better place, whether that's about how children learn to read, or that's about how cancer wreaks the devastation that it does, or that's about what the nature of ethnic strife is, or whether that's about what the roots of childhood poverty are. I very much hope that one part of our research and our thinking and our teaching will be a very, very important contribution to society. We all here are so very fortunate that I hope we all think about how we can use the one lifetime we have to make the greatest contribution.
The next question, President Summers, is from me, and it relates to our one of the pieces we read, James Traub's profile of you in the New York Times Magazine.
I have a passing familiarity with its content.
Yeah, good. In the end of that piece, he had just told you that many people dislike you, and I quote from the story. I promised there would be no flattery. Summers said quietly, "I'm sorry to hear that," but actually he wasn't too sorry. Quote, "I have an aggressive and challenging approach," he said, with one of those quick, embarrassed smiles he sometimes shoots into the middle of a sentence, reminding you of the inner adolescent, end quote. And Traub ends the article with the statement that you, quote, "don't think of leadership as a popularity contest." And I thought that raises interesting questions about the aspects of leadership, and I wondered if you could maybe reflect with us on one example from your career of leadership in the sense of exercising power, in the Max Weber sense of getting others to carry out your will even against their own wishes. And maybe one example in what we might call a Gandhian, Mahatma Gandhi sense of leadership, where the force of your own good example is what persuades others to follow you voluntarily.
This is quite unlike any other experience I've had since I came to the university, Brian.
I realized that this will be my last such experience at the university. So,
I didn't say whether it was better or worse than any experience I'd had since I came to the university. Maybe this is a Gandhian experience in demonstrating that I actually believe the stuff about anybody should be able to ask anybody anything else, whatever they want. I'm not sure I can answer the question in quite the terms you asked it. Let me talk about two acts of leadership in which I've had some role, and perhaps as a way of responding in part to your question. In January of 1995, Mexico was within 2 days of being unable to service its debts. Had it not been able to service its debts, the likelihood is that it would have suffered a major depression, that it would have had consequences throughout the developing world as panic spread, that there would have been large consequences for the United States along the 2,000-mile border that we share with Mexico, and that the stability of democracy in Mexico might have been in question. It would have been the easy thing to say that it was tragic that Mexico had made a set of mistakes that made it unable to pay its debts, and that it was tragic that there was the economic dislocation that resulted. But that's the way it was. That's essentially the approach that the United States had taken during the Reagan administration to a debt crisis that had emerged in the early 1980s in Latin America. And if you look through international economic history, it's the view that's taken most of the time in the face of terrible debt problems. Those of us in the government at the time, Secretary Rubin, myself, who were very close to the issue, felt that that would be a serious mistake. We felt that by extending us a large loan to Mexico, we could, and imposing a set of conditions on that loan, there was a very good chance that we could avert what would otherwise be a financial cataclysm with very large consequences for millions of people. There was no certainty that the United States would get that money back. We presented that idea to the president. We were not the only people in the room when the idea was presented to the president. One of his political advisors heard me explain it, and he said, you mean a $25 million loan, right, Larry? I said, no, I mean a $25 billion loan. The president was told by his chief of staff that if he extended this loan and it didn't come back, he could write off the next election. The matter had generated considerable attention, and the American people had been polled, and 80% of the American people were opposed to any kind of loan to Mexico, and half the rest were undecided. The congressional leadership made it clear that they were prepared to position themselves in such a way that they would share credit if a loan succeeded and blame it on the administration if the loan failed. President Clinton decided to extend that loan. That was not the consensus of his administration. That was not the consensus of the political leadership of this country. That was not the political consensus of the people of this country. It was the right thing to do. And sometimes people in leadership positions have to do that. It's an old-fashioned book. People don't read anymore. And judged as history, it's not actually that good a book. But John Kennedy's Profiles in Courage tells the story of a variety of elected officials in the history of our country who threw away their jobs by doing not what their constituents wanted them to, but what they thought was right. And that is a very important part of leadership. There are other cases where leadership's a matter of facilitating discussion, building consensus, generating support around things that touch many people's values. I take satisfaction in having been part of the leadership in the university's recent decision to take on the issue of equal opportunity in higher education that has long been a concern of ours by eliminating the financial aid requirement, parental contribution requirement for any student with a family income below $40,000. It is just not right that in selective American higher education, those in the bottom half of the income distribution are 80% underrepresented. We've got a chance to make a contribution to doing that through our financial aid policies, through our recruitment policies, and I'm proud to have been part of the leadership of the effort to change that policy. That's not resisting a organized and concerted opposition in the way that is involved in what we did with respect to Mexico, but it is overcoming a certain amount of inertia and a certain amount of averting of the gaze from an important issue, and that's a part of leadership as well.
Thank you for those examples. Ellen Quigley.
President Summers, you've made your views on scholarship and teaching fairly clear in your time as president. Frankly, this class doesn't seem like something you'd like. It emphasizes compassion over cash, social matters over hard data. What has changed during the last couple of years for you to agree to come to this class now but not accept previous invitations? As a related question, this class is not going to be offered next year, and I'm sure the other 612 students in this room are as disappointed about that as I am. Can Harvard really go without classes like this?
Ellen, I think somebody in my position has got to have two different kinds of ways of seeing the world. One is in terms of one's own personal views, and the other is types. Is this mic working? Can you hear me? The other is in terms of what types of activities are valuable at a university. I think a certain number of the views that are expressed on questions relating to globalization and what helps poor people in poor countries, a certain number of the views that are expressed in the syllabus of this course, I will be perfectly honest and concede that I think are silly and not supported by evidence. On the other hand, I think it's the glory of a university that my views aren't the views that set the curriculum at the university, and many, many different members of the faculty offer courses. Many, many different students choose to take different courses, and we don't try to preset a particular approach as we set courses. And so with respect to the question of whether a course like this should exist, that's not a matter of whether it agrees with my views or not. I hope that you and others can understand. I think I do a pretty good job of responding to invitations to visit classes and to attend a range of different types of functions at the university. But frankly, there are more invitations than there is time in the day, and so I'm not able to respond positively to every request or invitation every year. Frankly, one of the reasons I thought it was particularly important to respond to this invitation this year was because the views that I think it's fair to say that Brian has on at least a number of questions, and the views that by repute are not uncommon in this course, are views that I disagree with. But that's not any reason at all for me not to enthusiastically participate in the judgment and try to explain my ideas and perspectives. And certainly I hope that questions of morality, questions of social justice will continue in ways that are academic and intellectual to be an important part of the Harvard education in the future, as they have been in the past.
Grace Willens.
Hi. This question's a little long, so bear with me. While Harvard is often criticized for its elitism, the power and privilege of this institution don't have to be negative qualities. In this class, many of our guests have emphasized the idea that one's elite position in society can and should be utilized to enact social justice. How do you feel about the student activism of the 1960s and the living wage campaign that was played out here on campus? Is it a problem that students have to inspire, convince, pressure, trick, plead, and guilt the administration into political action? What would it mean to make Harvard a more democratic institution, and how would this change the perception of our school? Finally, what personal choices do you, arguably the most influential person at Harvard, make to encourage or discourage student activism? Thank you.
I think one needs to distinguish in thinking about this between a couple of different things. Harvard is an institution of teaching and learning, of creating knowledge and disseminating knowledge, is, in my judgment, a profoundly positive institution. If you look at the influence that a book like John Rawls' Theory of Justice has, if you look at the influence that ideas that have come out of this university have in so many spheres, from human rights to AIDS, have had, I think overall we have a great deal to be proud of as a community. It is not my belief, and I feel very strongly that Harvard will make a grave mistake if we become a political institution. If we become a political institution of the right or a political institution of the left. Frankly, Harvard's political record as a political institution is not one that we can, in many important respects, be terribly proud of. My predecessor, President Lowell, took an active part with the very strong encouragement of the Harvard faculty and Harvard student community in the debate over Justice Louis Brandeis's confirmation. His position was that Justice Brandeis should not be confirmed because he was Jewish. President Conant spoke in 1952 with the support of the vast majority of the Harvard faculty and student body on matters relating to academic freedom. He said that academic freedom was a paramount value and that we should be open to all perspectives. Though because of the great struggle the United States was engaged in against communism, it would be wrong for there to be any members of the faculty who were members of the Communist Party. That was the collective judgment of the student body and the faculty at that time. I could proliferate more examples of this kind. We exist independent of the society. We are not regulated by the society. We are able to maintain our openness to every perspective precisely because we as an institution do not become a political institution. So yes, it is for Harvard to promote equal opportunity in education. Yes, it is for Harvard to be a place where research is done on all manner and mean of questions. But it is not for Harvard to have an opinion on the merits of the Iraq War. It is not right for Harvard to have an opinion on right to choose versus right to life. There would be nothing that I could do that would be as damaging to this institution as to accept the idea that we were not a place whose objective was to maximize learning in all of its forms, but instead to accept the idea urged by some that we should be a general social action foundation supported by a large endowment in pursuing the good and the worthy in society. To do that would be to diffuse our mission, would be to put us in spheres where we would inevitably be mediocre, and would be to gravely compromise our capacity as an institution. If you look at the long sweep of history, it may be that at some particular moments that students or university faculties have been forces for what they see as a progressive politics relative to the national politics. But sometimes it is that way, and sometimes it is not that way. And if you look at institutions that have staying power as lights of the earth, with their emphasis on learning, they stay that way precisely because they do not, as institutions, take political positions. I spoke out very strongly with respect to the suggestion that was made by some a year or so ago, that Harvard divest any stock in any company that invests in Israel. I did that because it is just wrong to think of the university being instrumentalized to serve a foreign policy objective in the way that those suggestions were made. And I think we have to be terribly, terribly careful about contemplating the idea of the instrumentalization of the university.
I don't want to lose what I think was the second part of Grace's question. Should Harvard be structured more democratically internally?
I think we need to always think about to always think about what is the right way to structure ourselves, and I don't want to close myself off or close the university off to any particular proposals that people might have. But I think it's very important to understand what is the dominant form of popular and democratic control with respect to a university like Harvard. And that is the choices that students make about who comes here. That the Harvard exists in an extraordinarily competitive environment where very able students can choose to come here or can choose to come elsewhere. Where very able faculty can choose to come here or can choose to come elsewhere. We watch and monitor and measure very carefully how we succeed in attracting the very best students and the very best faculty, and others watch very carefully to see how we're succeeding in doing that. And that means that what we do, what the nature of our curriculum is, what type of faculty we're hiring, what types of choices we are made, are actually enormously sensitive to the judgments of students. And that's the dominant way in which we are responsive to the desires of students and faculty. And it is an enormously powerful form of responsiveness. When people think about how you're responsive to choice, how you're responsive to tastes and so forth, competition is a very powerful way of assuring that people get what they want. And if we're not giving students what they want, we will know it instantly in the form of the students who choose to come here or the students who do not choose to come here. So sure, there's some issues we may need to look at over time, but overall, universities in the United States are more responsive to the desires of students and faculties than universities anywhere else in the world, because the environment is so competitive and we do so much to promote that competitiveness. And that's a much more important kind of responsiveness than questions of who's on what committee.
Michael Hines.
Hi, President Summers. Keeping in mind the answer that you gave to Ellen about the two ways of viewing things, both the personal and the what's good for the university, and specifically regarding the 2001 Mass Hall sit-in faced by your predecessor, do you feel that the cause of the living wage campaign justified those students' actions? And in light of your response to that, do you think that there's a place on this university for acts of civil disobedience as a means of furthering worthy causes and cherished principles of ethics?
I'll tell you what I think. I don't see how anybody who looks at the history of the world can possibly take the position that civil disobedience is wrong. There's so much that's happened in the world that has been corrected by issues of civil disobedience that it is impossible to, in any blanket way, condemn or oppose civil disobedience. Civil disobedience has been responsible for some of the great transformations that have taken place in our country. I think particularly in the last half century of what has happened in civil rights. But I will give you two reactions, and I wasn't here at the time, and so I don't know all the aspects of it. But I will give you two reactions to this. One is that if you read Gandhi, or you read Martin Luther King, or you read any of the other thoughtful proponents and exponents of civil disobedience, they will all tell you that the punishment of the civilly disobedient is integral to the whole concept of civil disobedience. And that the civil disobedience, with the expectation that it will have consequences for those who sit in or those who revolt, that is central. For Martin Luther King, it was the act of being arrested and getting a criminal record was central to the civil disobedience that he was engaged in, and it wouldn't have been civil disobedience without the arrest. For those of you who've studied Gandhi or seen the movie, one knows of much more physical consequences to civil disobedience. And so the position that's been taken by some in this community that civil disobedience is noble, and it is so noble that it shouldn't be punished, and that it was right that there be no consequences to the occupation of a university building, seems to me to be a misreading of all that I know about civil disobedience. I have great respect for those who civilly disobey and are prepared to accept the consequences of it. My own view, and I think we got to a good solution following the work of the Katz Committee, is that there is substantially more moral complexity associated with the issues of the way we pay workers than those involved in the living wage campaign tended to suggest. For example, as I would sometimes point out to students who explained that it was very important that the university pay its staff in a way that reflected their needs and their needs to live, that this notion of need-based compensation had actually been one that was very prevalent in the universities in the late 1950s and the early 1960s. Very systematically, the university had a policy of paying men with children more than it paid single women, because after all, they had far greater needs. And it was important for a caring institution to be responsive to needs. There are questions also with respect to the moral value of changing compensation policies in ways that lead to a reduction in the number of people who are employed, or that lead to a substitution away from less skilled and less educated immigrants towards more privileged long-term residents of the country. Those are also morally complicated questions. So, no, the living wage campaign, in the way that it was carried on, didn't engage me as representing obvious step towards greater social justice. But that's not a reason why people who felt that way shouldn't have been prepared to carry it on. But I do think that we probably should all be able to agree that accepting consequences is part of the idea of civil disobedience.
Adebola Owalewa.
Hi, President Summers. Thanks for coming. My question is, in your professional opinion, what are the benefits of being a legacy to an academic community, and what role should legacy play in the debate over affirmative action in the college process? Thank you.
It's really great to be here. It's really terrific. Look, it's a hard issue. I guess that what I would say is that if you look at admissions policies at Harvard, and something similar would be true at most of the country's great universities, they compose a class that is diverse and that provides people with many different backgrounds who are admitted for many different reasons because of what that class means to each other and because of what that class means to the institution. We at Harvard think of ourselves as a community and think of our alumni as part of our community. Our alumni as part of our community benefit us in many, many ways. Certainly the contributions that they give that make it possible for us to do things like making financial aid universally available, eliminating the parental contribution is one type of benefit they bring. The service that our alumni will have, within the next 5 years, provided, statistically speaking, to 30 or 40 people in this room in helping them locate their next jobs is another kind of benefit that they perform. The role they perform in recruiting many fine students who wouldn't otherwise apply to Harvard. To apply to Harvard is another benefit that they perform. That all comes from our having a sense of community here. And to some degree, communities take care of their own. It's not something that's just true in higher education. If you look at the plumbers union or the carpenters union, it's vastly easier to get in if you're related to a plumber or to a carpenter. If you look at a state university, it's much easier to get in if you live in that state. Communities take care of their own to some degree. If you look at what we actually do at Harvard, I think it would be fair to say that legacy preferences are less pronounced than is often supposed. And I think it is much better to focus on who we want to have than on who we don't want to have. Think about this. Harvard will this year reject about 18,000 students. It will admit on the order of less than 200 legacies. And many of those are students who would be entirely admittable if they were not legacies. It doesn't seem right to think of the main reason why people aren't able to come here as having to do with that legacy status. But it's a hard issue, and my own instinct has been that what's most constructive is rather than attacking one preference or another or pitting one preference against another preference, to think about the really crucial issue of what we as a university can do to try to promote more equal opportunity.
President Lawrence Summers, for sharing with us your passion for lucid analysis and lively debate. We thank you.
Thank you.